I'm gonna have to jump on GarageBand and start sawing something together. This is the House Bar Show. Wow, and a guitar note, and then progressive and all. Yeah, it's gonna be good.
Hey, Hal, did you mean something like this?
This is the House Bar Show. Wow, and a guitar note, and then progressive and all. Yeah, it's gonna be good.
The Hal Sparks radio program, Mega Worldwide.
Yeah, it's gonna be good.
Very exciting. Philip, you're with us. It's a miracle. From
modern technology, huh?
My man. Look at that. And then even on there with Johnny Million, it's nice to make your acquaintance visually and Johnny's acquaintance visually. And then I've just got to move myself out of the way so that everybody can see you. And then, because, you know, there's work to be done. And first of all, welcome. Glad you're with us. Glad you're safe currently. You're in Lviv right now?
I am. I'm in the west of the country, in Lviv, near the Polish border. Relatively safe, but we do occasionally get air raid sirens, so always
crazy.
I'm curious about the first and foremost the border with Moldova. So there's an area that a lot of people.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Hal, but can I just be like totally pandering for one quick second before we start? Firstly, your audience is amazing.
I agree.
All right. Secondly, thank you for posting my YouTube channel where I've begun vlogging, and thank you for that.
Of course.
And thirdly, and lastly, I tweeted at you. I was walking around town a couple of days ago, and I ran into a comedy club. So when this is all over,
I'm there. Free shows for the Ukrainians. Absolutely. I'll learn all kinds of foul slang. All right. I'm for it.
Now let's talk. Okay.
Yes.
You want to talk about Transnistria?
So here's one of the, so a lot of people don't necessarily focus on this, especially in that in the Crimea and Donbass area, which get a lot of attention, the eastern part of the country, because it's right up against Russia, and the fact that they took it in 2014 and that they've been trying to salami slice their way across the country. What's forgotten is that the Russians do have what's effectively a smaller Western front that they've been fomenting for a long time as well. And that's over closer to where you are. What's, my curiosity is, it doesn't seem like there's a pincer move going on right now because it doesn't seem like they have a strategy much at all except go in there and take stuff. But what's the feeling there about that part, and what are you seeing on the ground?
Well, okay, so if we're talking about Macedonia, Moldova. And there's a breakaway republic there called Transnistria, where Russia actually does have troops. Look, it isn't a large base, but it does exist. Now, in order to link up with them, they're going to have to run along the southern coastline of Ukraine, take Odessa, which would be a major blow to Ukraine, and cut their exports by a significant, if not almost completely cut them off from the sea. And it's just a small stretch from Odessa to Transnistria. That would create a rump Ukraine, and the Russians could just let it wither on the vine.
That, in theory, anyways. That's under old sort of USSR ideas that they wouldn't be connected to Europe, or that Europe wouldn't just use land masses to get stuff in and increase their, the NATO structures around them as well. So that from a old game of Risk idea, that would work. Currently, though, not so much. And it would be a mess.
Frighteningly, yeah, absolutely. And frighteningly enough, I think that Vladimir Putin still thinks it is the 20th century, and that the games of Risk do still have validity. He's going to get an ugly shock, of course, because this country is going to keep fighting him as long as there's a Ukrainian standing.
Right. And Philip, I've been reading it for a long time. Tell me the proper pronunciation of your last name.
Ittner. That's
what I thought.
My family came over. My family came over from Munich in the late 19th century to Michigan, where you just were, and I would have invited you up to my cottage. But
oh, that's awesome. Well, yes, the Ittners. Yes, yeah, it's the Ittners.
Das ist
the Ittners. That's based on the old idea that blacksmiths, that was your job. You could be a woodsmith. It was your job. The Ittners just dealt with it. What's that? That's just named stuff. The Ittners were like,
well, it's even worse.
It, and now
it's even worse. It's even worse than that. My parents, in a cruel joke, gave me the middle name of Eichhorn, which translates from German into squirrel. So
Sure. Yeah.
take that.
Right. Which is weird because Eichhorn sounds like something a squirrel eats, and it's curious. I mean, those that Latin Germanic French language mixture that gave us English. Remember, every pretty word in English comes from the French. Every ugly one comes from the German. So you can fill in the blanks there. Now, so this is that idea of them taking Odessa and them wanting to cut that off or holding that like it could be with held, which it cannot. Even if they have the boats there, just like with the threat of shelling, it just doesn't become functional ports. Now, one of the reasons why they want that area around Odessa, quite frankly, and why they want that area around Crimea is because the oil and gas deposits that were discovered in 2012, and that which in many ways was what Yanukovych was there to deliver, hence how Burisma was a corrupt organization until that darn Hunter Biden came in there and started using his dad's name to make sure that the money given by investors went actually to the company instead of into Russia, which is what it used to do. And now the Ukrainians have a functioning oil and gas sector, and oops. No wonder they're mad about
as opposed to the wonderful thing that wonderful things that Manafort was doing here.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So my question is, what's the feeling on the street where you are in Lviv? Are people leaving? Are they staying and fighting? Is there a mix?
There's a mix. A lot of people, women and children, are flooding out of here. And I got to tell you, this town is absolutely bursting at the seams. I've come to this town. Well, I've been coming to Ukraine for 21 years. My first trip here was Pope John Paul II, which shows you how old I am. You and I are roughly, we're both Gen Xers, Hal, so you know what I'm talking about. Gotta love our forgotten generation, the Gen X generation. There's a mix. This is normally a town of about 700,000 people. At least 200,000 extra people are here now, so that's a massive burden on this town. Whoa. But I say that as a burden, but you know what I have noticed after coming to this country for 21, many of them are passing through. Yes, many of them are headed for Poland ultimately. Men are not allowed to leave between 18 and 60. Women and children are. But I've been, as I say, I've been coming here for 21 years. I've never seen this country as unified as it is. Even Odessa, which has a history of, well, frankly, organized crime because it's a port city and there's a lot of smuggling that goes on through Odessa. Sure. And they are Russian speaking and they tend to kind of lean more towards Russia. That's gone. That's gone. That's gone. This country is completely unified. This country is, I've never seen it as unified as this is. There are divisions between West and East, North and South, between a Catholic West and an Eastern Orthodox East. But that's all gone. That's all gone.
That's the power of sort of accidental nationalism. That's what happens when you attack a place. I mean, that's the lesson of Pearl Harbor. It's the opposite lesson that I think a lot of people learned from 9/11. Looking backwards, is that you could have that weaponized. You could, if you were attacked, if you're attacked, you could have your fear, anger, and loathing of the other pointed in a direction and just kind of turned loose, which is the danger of that. And I think we learned a valuable lesson as Americans from that. And we've been very suspicious and cautious ever since. I have heard a lot of people, Philip, refer to, in Russian media, refer to this in sort of a 9/11-esque kind of a way, using the same language we used about Iraq to justify Iraq going in, which again, Americans wouldn't buy right now. Many of us didn't at the time. So we certainly don't, we look at it side-eyed. But the one interesting part about this is that there were no Ukrainian planes flown into Russian buildings or even Lithuanian ones. And while we're at it, let's beat up Ukraine, like that idea. They don't have that pretext. They concocted it out of whole cloth. Now, here's go ahead.
Well, there's there are a couple of distinct differences between what America's post 9/11 adventures, such a flippant word, wars that we got engaged with. There's a distinct difference, and I know maybe I'm splitting hairs, but we, to my knowledge, we never proposed that Iraq or Afghanistan would be the 51st state.
Right. Yes.
What Russia is proposing here is an annexation of this country, and not only that, if you listen to that hour-long rant of Vladimir Putin, if you're a Russian speaker, if you have the subtitles in English, he goes on for 57 minutes talking about how Ukraine is not really an independent country. It's a tribe of Slavs, and we, as the arbiters of what Slavic national heritage and identity is, we get to determine. We Russians, as the King Slavs, get to determine who you Ukrainians get to be as Slavs. And the Ukrainians are saying, no, that's not the case.
Right. It's not true for the rest of Eastern Europe. Why would it be true for that one particular breakoff? Now, I will push back, Philip, in that I do believe that Donald Trump's plan was to turn Afghanistan into the 51st state, because he's admitted multiple times since he left office, or was surreptitiously tossed from office, that he never intended to leave Afghanistan, that we were going to keep Bagram effectively and operate it as a puppet state, and then we're going to remove all the gear, every nut, every screw, every bolt, every soldier, every person, except for everybody at Bagram, which would tacitly run the country from there. Or the parts of the Republican Party that thought we should stay in there with a version of control for, of 10,000 troops forever, and you'd need 60,000 just to
I went to Afghanistan many times. I've been to Afghanistan lots of times.
Right.
Yeah,
and
I get it. And I may be making a difference without a distinction by saying we didn't try to make them into the 51st state, because of course our American corporations would have gone into, or intended to go into, both Afghanistan and Iraq and steal everything that wasn't nailed down. So I may be splitting hairs here, but nevertheless, for a Ukrainian, and I know many Ukrainians who, look at their national poet. They're Shakespeare, they're Robert Burns if you're a Scot, or Rumi if you're Iranian. A guy by the name of Taras Shevchenko, who used to write in the 1840s about Ukrainian independence, and he was jailed by the czars for doing so, for daring to write poems in his native Ukrainian language. This is a long time coming. This is centuries of history. This ground is soaked in blood.
We have to take a break, and when we come back, if you could stick around with us, I want to talk to you about that whole idea that Putin has been seemingly fixated on anew, because he's, I guess, been in isolation for a while, and maybe that's all he's been watching is like Russian YouTube history videos, and it's just driven him nuts that it's a shot, or that this was always the plan from 91. He was angry then. He was angry when he took over in 99. The manipulation of Yeltsin was an actual ploy by this, and that the fall of the Soviet Union was effectively a rope-a-dope. That's my theory. I'm sticking to it. Don't answer until we come back. It's the House program.
We'll get into it.
Yeah. Mega Worldwide on WCPT Radio, Chicago's Progressive Talk, 820 AM. If you want on your AM dial, you can program that into your car radio. You have one of those, don't you? Yeah, do that. We'll be back.
I thought there was going to be like a new one every break. I was so excited.
You want more, Hal? We'll give you more. Hal Sparks radio program, Mega Worldwide on Chicago's Progressive Talk, WCPT 820. Hoo-yah!
Just in time, Johnny Million rolling back in. We've got Philip Ittner with us live in Lviv, Ukraine, in a lovely little apartment that I'm fairly certain is the place where they shot the early scenes in Iron Man 2, where Mickey Rourke was angered over the death of his father and the technology stolen from.
I just need a bed, Hal. I just need a bed and a place to broadcast from.
I'm for it. I think it's awesome. Okay, so there's so much to unpack and all this.
Oh
stuff.
God, there's so much.
You were saying one of the things is that Vladimir Putin's been involved in asymmetrical warfare his entire life. As a former KGB agent, he's probably still pissed it's called the GRU now. Like, the loss of that name is enough to anger him. The naivete of Americans that these folks would get the way, you know, and it's similar to sort of our beliefs about like installing democracy in Iraq or something, that looking back at 91 and looking back at the, you know, the people who were true believers who fought for decades against the evil empire, as if they were just going to wake up tomorrow and go, blue jeans and rock, this is awesome. When the younger people did, but the ones who were entrenched, the boomer generation of that particular group had been, I mean, basically brainwashed, and then took it over like, no, you don't have to brainwash myself. Hand me the steel wool. I'll do it myself. And Vladimir Putin is a prime example of that. And so
100%.
how is the whole one people idea talked about in Ukraine? You know, because Vladimir Putin believes that the Russians and the Ukrainians are one people. And therefore, since we're one people, I'm family. If I want to lay on your couch for a little while and then own the house, it's up to me. You know, how is that taken there?
You're right. There's an awful lot to unpack here. How is that felt here? Let me put it in the terms of a poet, friend of mine, a Ukrainian poet, who in 2014 wrote a poem that it infuriated Russia. She wrote it in Russian as a Ukrainian. And I'm not going to say it in Russian because I know you get to get away with talking Mandarin, but I don't get to talk Russian, so fine.
No.
But the poem is basically, we will never be brothers again. You have broken our kinship. Oof. And that was in 2014 on Maidan. And she has since updated it with she's made a music video with a rock band here, putting her poem to music, and she's updated it with the latest attack. So we will never be brothers again is the message from the Ukrainians. I mean, the bridges have been burned.
Yeah, and so, I mean, we've dealt with this in the United States as far as reconciliation post Civil War. Like we are one country, and we're still dealing with this stuff. We don't have the benefit of a permanent border. You know, this is not the Mexican-American War, or even the Canadians in Tecumseh siding with the Brits, right? This is our internally. We have a hard enough time doing that, and we're making progress, but it takes time, and it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But what do you see? What's your prediction, Philip? Because I have my own ideas about this, about what Russia is after this as a country.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
Well,
see, I got you.
Well, no, I mean, it's because I love this country, Hal. I do. It's a beautiful, amazing country filled with beautiful, amazing people. Warts and all. But you know, they.
By the way, are you talking about Ukraine or Russia?
I'm talking about Ukraine. No, I'm talking. I love Russia for different reasons, but Russians have an identity crisis problem. There's a reason why the national symbol of Russia is a double-headed eagle, one head looking east and one head looking west. They don't know who they are. I mean, this is their whole sense of I'm getting a Russian.
It's also paranoia. Let's be honest. They got two borders to watch all the time.
They see Americans behind every tree. The CIA is behind everything. Yeah,
right.
No, the Maidan, when I was on Maidan in 2014, you know, the thing was, this is all CIA orchestrated. Vladimir Putin, as a KGB agent of our, you know, kind of generation, the Cold War generation, sees the CIA everywhere. He doesn't believe in popular movements because he can't fathom the idea that individuals and people would gather together and say, no, we want a different future for our country. Somebody has to be behind it, because in his mind, that's what he does. So,
right. Also,
you know,
also it's something
they're projecting.
If he could imagine it, if he could function within it, he would be a wholly different human being. He would be effectively a Zelensky of the modern era, which is take the history of this country and the depth of it, just like colonial England or early America or any of these countries or any of the African countries that are starting to like grow and develop, or any of the South American countries the same way. Take their history culturally and modernize them for the benefit of their own people as best they can. But he seems in many ways somewhere between incapable of even imagining that. Maybe it's a lack of imagination because of fear and paranoia, or just lack of skill. That technology is only for spying. Yeah.
Yeah, technology is only for spying. Everything is orchestrated by nefarious shadow operations, and it's projection. He sees the world that way. So I was in Moscow in the 90s, and before I can answer where Russia goes from here, I have to go back a little bit and talk about where Russia came from that brought Vladimir Putin to power. I was in Moscow as a CBS radio reporter in the late 1990s. And you talk about Reconstruction. After the fall of the Cold War, after the fall of the Soviet Union, the end of the Cold War, instead of sending a Marshall Plan, which is what we really should have done, we sent in carpetbaggers, just the same way as post-Civil War in America. We had guys in there stealing it was disgusting. I saw it. And Yeltsin let him get away with it. And so the Russian people, seeing all this corruption and seeing all of their wealth being stolen by Western capital venturists, said enough of that. We need what they call is a strong hand. We need somebody who's going to crack heads. And so that's why they were for Vladimir Putin. And that's where we find ourselves 20 years later, after 20 years of brainwashing and 20 years of repression. The Russian people, I am afraid to say, have gotten to a point where they will buy anything. I mean, you think Fox News is bad? Boy, you should watch some Russian TV sometime.
Even RT over here. It's so funny because there's some what I would RT. What we would traditionally call a left-leaning TV talkers like Lee Camp and others who will come out and say, I like being on RT, or they did until they all got fired because RT shut down because it could no longer. All these people that I'm talking about suddenly had to admit that their invasion was wrong. So you can't even have their show on the air anymore. They didn't realize that they're letting this person pay their rent this entire time, and then there's a fee involved later. Well, a lot of them were saying I can say anything I want on RT the way I couldn't on the corporate American media, was the argument order. Well, that's because they would never think to say anything bad about the Russian government, ever. Not ever. It's the same thing with Chinese.
Jimmy Dore would love
vloggers.
RT.
Yeah, exactly. Right. That's exactly right. And he was on multiple times. And we've had some people like Tom Hartman, who I like very much, who was also on there for a time. And the reason they do that is because they know you will talk down the West and you will feel free, emboldened to do this. And therefore, and even though they'll never tell you explicitly, don't talk.
Loves self-loathing Americans. RT loves self-loathing Americans. They just, it's like manna, it's like manna from heaven.
Well, it's money that prints itself. And they've been doing that for a long time. The minute, though, that these people, who they saw as useful idiots, which is the entire purpose of things like that. This is the way we saw Trump, and he was absolutely kowtowing to Putin every time we saw him, actively being a useful idiot. The one thing about these people is that at some point they outlive their usefulness. And they just become useless idiots, and they get jettisoned because at some point, even these folks, even as self-loathing as they are, their eyes still work to some degree, and they can recognize that this invasion is completely adventurism by Putin based on some lunacy that he has in his head. And it's a horrible act of violence, and real people are dying. And so just mentioning that, RT's off the air. RT is gone. And not because the U.S. State Department shut it down or the DOJ shut it down or cable box. I mean, I think DirecTV canceled their contract, but they were already planning on doing that earlier, later this year. They just moved it up, whatever. But which is weird that it had been on that long. Without saying, by the way, we don't have North Korean state TV on DirecTV over here. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's weird that they don't go, by the way. Yeah. But anyway, so that messaging, the second question I think for most people is that where do the Russian people who, how are they seeing this story? Because we're talking about, well, hold on. We have to take a break, and this is a hard break for news. Can you stick with us? Because I want to talk about.
I can stay as long as you want me. That's
Excellent.
why I'm here, pal. Well, that's why I'm here.
All right, look. All right, you're locked in then for the next hour. So, excellent, Philip. We'll be back right after this. I want to talk to you about the propaganda war around the bombing of the maternity ward and other stuff from the Russian and Ukrainian standpoints, and the tank positions and all that kind of stuff. The social media fight that's going on. All right, we'll be back right after this.
You're listening to the Hal Sparks radio program, Mega Worldwide.
I've had people walk out at me before, but not when I was being so charming.
Video streaming at halsparks.com.
I don't care for you or for the putrid sludge you're troweling out.
Damn fuss-faced little pimp stick.
True progressive talk.
Might be a good time for you guys to give up.
Welcome back to the show. Philip Ittner is with us in Lviv in Ukraine, and Johnny Millian, of course, is checking the chat, and he's going to let us know if they have any questions in the in there that pertain to our conversation.
Please, questions.
And we're also we were discussing before we came on, and there's so much to unpack in this. It's a Gordian knot of historical craziness.
I've been studying it for 30 years, and I'm still.
Yeah, it's still, well, because here's the problem. Yes, there's historical context in the same way that there's historical context for Russia to seize Odessa and Crimea for its strategic value in battles or whatever. But that is in a pre-cell phone mentality. We live currently in a time where all concepts of borders and stuff are being upended by the internet and all this stuff, even to the point where Russia has announced that they are cutting off their internet from the rest of the world, a la North Korea.
Yeah, wonder why.
Yeah, and that's what you do when you're in the right and there's neo-Nazis one country over. You shut off your internet. That's how you prove that you're on the actions. That's right. That's how you do it. And in the world right now, what country that is functional wants to emulate North Korea? Even Iran doesn't have that kind of limitations on the internet. I mean, it's definitely hard, but they don't come down hard. Like, no, I mean, because there's so much to this. Here's one of the things I would like to read out.
There's so much to it. But look, hey, Hal, he can try as much as he wants, but Russians, especially young Russians, are incredibly intelligent, well-educated, and tech-savvy. They're still getting plenty. They're getting messages. Right. They know what's going on.
And this idea that the idea. Oh, I will do that. Yes.
Yep, we'll do. Anastasia Dimitrik.
Right. And I'm going to
Anastasia
create a
DM. Go ahead.
We'll put that up there. So I'll look people are asking, and by the way, and Johnny Millian, you can ask ask that verbally when we do stuff so that people at home on the radio can hear you as well. But I want to do this. I want to talk about how the messaging back and forth. This is turned into, in so many ways, a social media war as much as anything else. That and by the way, your Twitter is at Philip Ittner, correct?
Well, and Philip, 2 T's and Ittner.
Yeah, right. And I'm going to put that up on screen. It looks like Philip Ittner, but people will understand. In this, let's see. Whoops. How it seems like a war of words as much as anything else, because one of the areas where people can push back on this, where they can't pick up a rifle, is that they can call out the BS, or they can they can create some of their own. In the case of Russia, how is that being taken? Is everybody taking stuff with a grain of salt, or are they I'm curious about that part of it. Yeah,
in Russia and Ukraine.
I mean, yeah, in Ukraine largely. How are they viewing the Russian propaganda stuff? Yeah.
The Ukrainians are well versed in Russian disinformation campaigns. They've been dealing with it for many years. They're well aware of it. Unfortunately, however, there's also a disinformation campaign that's being waged by Ukrainians themselves. Not necessarily the government, but everybody's trying to get the upper hand in the propaganda war. Generally, though, Ukrainians are not as nefarious at it. again, there's so many subtleties to it.
It's sort of like they're cuter about it.
They are definitely exaggerating. They're exaggerating the death toll for sure. They say that 11,000 Russian soldiers have been killed. I mean, that's highly unlikely. Right. I don't think it's anywhere near as high as that. But that happens in war. That's happened since the beginning of warfare.
Sure.
But what the Russians do is they have weaponized information. They have actually turned information into a tool of war. We have been a victim of it. I don't want to go into it, but 2016, hello.
Yep.
We saw it in Brexit. We saw it with Brexit. We saw it in France. We saw it in Poland. We saw it in Estonia. We've seen it. They have been practicing. And the reason why I saw back in 2016, the second the DNC drop happened, I was in a car with a television crew coming back from an overseas location shoot, and I heard it on the radio, and I turned to my colleagues and I said, "That's the Russians." And they went, Phil, you see Russians behind every tree. I said, no. I say that because I was in Georgia in 2008. I have studied the Russians since 1998. This is their MO. They're completely their MO. And if you start to pay attention to it and you see the techniques, it's obvious. And so the Ukrainians aren't buying any of this. Unfortunately, however, Russians who have been isolated and have a steady diet of BS shoved down their throat. I mean, I have lovely Russian friends who are telling me that I'm not seeing what I'm seeing with my own two eyes. Right. They're beautiful, wonderful people, and I love them dearly, but they've been brainwashed. And it's going to take a period of whenever Putin falls, and inevitably he will, as all dictators do, there will be an opening of their eyes, and they will be, I fear, very ashamed of what has been done here in their name. And you asked me, where does Russia go after this? And I kind of went back to where Yeltsin in the 90s. Let me now push it forward. Where is Russia going to be after this disastrous war? And this is the really sad thing, and it weighs heavily on my heart, Hal. We are about to see something happen, I fear, in Kiev, that is going to be a real atrocity. The Russians don't do war by half measures. Their military doctrine is very different than ours. We did terrible things in Iraq and Afghanistan. I was witness to it. I was a reporter in both of those places. I have been embedded with the U.S. military many times. We like to pretend we're the good guys, and so we do restrain ourselves. The Russians have no such compunction. The world is about to see what a major military power, the way a major military power can conduct the siege of a city without any restraint. If they maintain their military doctrine as they have in the past, we are about to see the destruction of one of the most beautiful cities in Europe and the birthplace of Russian culture. And I think that is going to be impossible for the Russian people to ignore. Right. So what happens after that? When they're slaughtering their neighbors, it's not going to sit well with them. They're humans like everybody else. They're going to have empathy.
Eventually, yeah. And I will say that is true of some of the soldiers as well, which is why there's talk of conscripts. There's why there's talk of bringing in Syrians, Chechnyan kill squads, and that kind of stuff, because they don't have the same alliances towards the Ukrainian people that Russian soldiers would. And the problem they're having is beyond the idea that, Putin has tricked some of these people, apparently, the soldiers, into thinking they were just doing exercises in Belarus, and then all of a sudden they're in hot war. What the hell happened? Which is debatable.
What would have happened if the Iraqis or the Afghans had spoken perfect English?
Right.
Do you think our soldiers would have conducted it's easier to dehumanize an enemy if you don't understand them.
That's right.
They don't have that benefit here, the Russians. They know what these people are saying to them. And the Ukrainian people, when the Russians come in, say, "What the F are you doing here? Why are you on my territory? Go away. We don't want you here." No, we don't have a Nazi in government in Kiev. We, unlike you, have had at least 3 peaceful transfers of power in our recent history. You have never had a peaceful transfer of power. So,
that's
they
I think makes it, that bogs it down.
The guilt of the Russian soldier is obvious.
Yeah, and that makes it much more that makes that siege idea you're talking about much more complicated than if they were taking, because again, when the Soviets invaded Afghanistan, which some people in 1979, between like Christmas and New Year's, they roll in and the current leader of the installed communist regime of Afghanistan that was friendly to the Russians wasn't friendly enough, or was just enjoying his power. As a matter of fact, he was using the same monarchical palace. They used that space as sort of the president's headquarters at that time, and they thought it was going to his head, and he was getting all uppity and thought he could actually run his own country. God forbid. So they rolled down, surrounded it, and killed the dude. And he was actually happy to see them at first, because he was like, oh, the Russians are here. Cool. I'm worried about being deposed, and they're here to save me. And then they blew his brains out. Then that was tough enough. They got bogged down in that because they had Spetsnaz, Afghan Muslim Spetsnaz special forces that worked with them at the time, and that was complicated for them. That's what hung them up, arguably, for the better part of 8 or 10 months, so that the U.S. could start giving, support to the Mujahideen and other groups, the Yusufzad and others, so that they could fight back against them. So quietly, by the way, that even Osama bin Laden and his crowd didn't know that the munitions they were firing came from us, and viewed us as an equal villain to these folks, instead of just going, oh, thanks, you help us get these guys out of here. So that was complicated. That was rough. They got bogged down there, and they absolutely viewed largely the Afghans as an other. You could very possibly, depending on how far you used to go into that country on your own.
You could even make that argument with Chechnya. You could even make that argument with Chechnya.
Totally.
Even the Chechens spoke Russian, but they were still easily look. I have been to war. They look
Turkish, and they're Muslims.
Times.
Yeah, right.
And they're Muslims, and I have been to war many, many times. Unfortunately, I had hoped to hang up my hat and never go again, but I felt an obligation to these people, and then we can go into that in a personal story if you want some time. But I have an obligation to this country. I made a promise on my dawn that if this happened, I would return. And as much as I hate war and have had enough for 2 lifetimes of it, I feel compelled to come here. But the reason why, there's a reason why in a firing squad there's always one guy who doesn't get the bullet, or he gets a blank or whatever, and we've talked about that in the past. Human beings actually don't like to kill one another. Generally, they're psychopaths, but generally we don't like to kill one another. So the leadership has to dehumanize the enemy, and so it's easier when there is a language barrier or a cultural barrier, something where you can other the enemy. They don't have that here. They don't have that. Putin has tried it by saying they're Nazis and fascists and what they call banderisti, and that's because there was a Ukrainian guy who fought with the Nazis because he would have fought with the devil to get rid of the Soviets, who just killed 3 million of his people by a imposed famine. But they are not able to other the Ukrainians. And so the morale is incredibly low. Now, as far as the siege of Kiev is concerned, unfortunately, again, I'm going to go back to what I know about Russian military doctrine.
Then hold that thought for a second, because we got to take a break. Yeah, we'll be back right after this. Real quick break. This is the Hal Sparks Radio program, Mega Worldwide.
Welcome back to the Hal Sparks Radio program, Mega Worldwide.
Welcome back to the show. Philip's in the process of looking up the poem we mentioned earlier, because somebody in the chat was asking that. If you're watching the live stream at infotainmentwars.com, we don't need the documents. We've got all the memories. And, of course, twitch.tv/Hal Sparks. Like and subscribe today. Support the show in any way you can. Patreon.com/Hal Sparks. And other graphics that allow you to do stuff. Now, where were we in this Gordian knot of Russian stuff? In this, yes, before we went poem hunting.
Okay, I've almost got it, and then you got my full. There, I'm just gonna.
Okay,
here you go, Hal.
Here's what I want. Excellent. I will retweet that as soon as we get a moment. So, I was just reading this article on American Purpose, which I'm sure.
Yeah, I want to talk about that. I found that very interesting, but I wanted to finish the thought that we had before we went to break, and that is this. We're talking about you have to make the enemy the other, and you have to distance your soldiers from them so that they can, I mean, if they're just pushing a button and stuff, that's why these drone strikes are so offensive to so many, is because some guy in Nevada doesn't care. It's a video game to him. I fear, knowing Russian military doctrine, that they are going to pound the heck out of Kiev from afar first with artillery and air power. And it is going to be tragic because it's a really beautiful city. But I think it's going to bite them in the back because many Russians are going to see it, and they know that that is the birthplace of their culture, Kievan Rus.
Right.
Actually, the Vikings came down the waterways, the riverways, settled in Kiev. Kievan Rus began the culture, and then they moved up to Moscow. So Russians know that. And when they see St. Sofievsky Cathedral in a beautiful, beautiful church being blown to what, I don't think it's going to be too bitter of a pill for them to swallow.
Right.
So,
and they still have to, and they still have to get there, which is another part that they're running up against too. So in this article, one of the things he brings up was and I agree with this part, and this is the piece of it that I retweeted that he'd written. The Biden administration's decision not to declare a no-fly zone or help transfer Polish MiGs were both good ones. They've kept their heads during a very emotional time. It is much better to have the Ukrainians defeat the Russians on their own, depriving Moscow of the excuse that NATO attacked them, as well as avoiding all the obvious escalatory possibilities. The Polish MiGs, in particular, would not add much to the Ukrainian capabilities. Much more important is continuing supply of Javelin, Stingers, TB2s, medical supplies, comms equipment, and intel sharing. I assume that the Ukrainian forces are already being vectored by NATO, which they absolutely are, operating from outside Ukraine. I also would, I have no knowledge of this directly, but this is my own intuitive feeling, is that they are not the only people piloting these Bayraktar drones inside the country.
Yeah, probably not. You're right.
No, I mean, I would doubt that private people are doing it, much less. Right. Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, look, we've got foreign fighters, Brits and French and Americans and Canadians. There's a huge Ukrainian diaspora in Canada coming here to fight as kind of a Lincoln Brigade kind of thing. And you know what? At the end of the day, you're right. No-fly zone is a step too far, but it's so hard to swallow for me being here and seeing Ukrainians coming to me every day and saying, "We're getting the
but they are getting right, but they are also largely getting shelled."
It's tough for me to look at them in the eyes. Yeah,
agreed. They are getting shelled with surface-to-surface missiles and surface-to-surface artillery. This is not something and no-fly zone would actually remedy. And what they think is, and I think a lot of people feel it, no-fly zone also means that they can strafe bomb tank positions and stuff like that, which they absolutely cannot do. That's not what a no-fly zone would be. And it actually wouldn't end any of the artillery shelling that they're talking about, nor any of the shelling from the Black Sea, which is what you're talking about in Odessa and other places, the cover coming from there, or missiles coming from, or short-range artillery and long-range artillery coming from Belarus, which is also the other place they're firing. This would not be, it's one of the reasons why, like the building that they show, that a lot of people show the rocket hitting that was on camera.
The apartment. Yeah.
Right. There's, logistically, that was more than likely a surface artillery firing, a long range artillery, semi missile, like whatever the size of it. But yeah.
2 nights ago, was it 2 nights? It kind of gets to be a blur here. We had 3 in quick succession air raid alerts, and it turns out what it was them targeting an airfield about 60 miles north of me in a town called Lutsk. And, it was a military airfield. It was a purposeful hit by a medium range rocket. And, you don't hit an airfield unless you're afraid that the Ukrainians are trying to mount some sort of air campaign and, that you feel threatened by Ukrainian air power. We're 17 days into this thing, Hal. We're 17 days into it. Do you know how quickly we got air superiority?
Yes. Yeah. Well, that's the fun. And that's the other
thing, too. It's the first thing we do.
Right.
When we go into a country, the first thing we do is control the air. And they still don't control it, clearly. Otherwise, they wouldn't be hitting airfields.
Exactly. And the problem that you have is one of the reasons you do that is because you can bomb stuff from the air and you can indiscriminately fire on places because of your helicopter, your helicopters and your airplanes are fighting enemy encampments, not cities. And anybody who's ever seen Blue Thunder knows that not only is urban warfare difficult, but the ancillary costs of it make it an impossibility as far as hearts and minds go. The minute one of your helicopters flies through a downtown area, firing missiles or shooting at people, the worm turns. There is no point where you walk in and go, okay, trust us. If you lay down your arms, we're going to be fine. Because they don't, image, that helicopter in the streets, flying around in these buildings that you were in as a couple days ago on your way to the store shifts your mentality, and they know this. So they have to leave those back. They have to, the only places they can use those things are on these long farm roads to sort of protect the convoy, and they don't, because guerrilla warfare being what it is and other artillery being able to fire from as far away it is, the helicopters don't necessarily have the range to deal with these long-range artillery that are firing on the convoy when it comes in, and then they pull the stuff back or let it get blown up and then fire on them with javelins, and that's what we've seen multiple times. And it's almost as if the Russians at this point are being drawn out, maybe you will make it. Maybe you will make it. And then they move down the road a little further. We just saw an image of 10 diesel trucks that they had to resupply their convoy blown to smithereens. This is not the war Putin thought he was going to fight, and neither is it the soldiers that are there. It's heartbreaking that some of them, are clearly aware.
They don't want to be there.
Right.
Oh, no. Yeah, absolutely. No, but Putin is a guy who would bomb his own apartment buildings in his ascent to power so that he could have a pretext to go into Chechnya. So this is the kind of guy who's at the top. So, Well,
he had poison sprayed in the face of his primary rival the first time, and he jailed the second guy, Lexington. Yeah.
And this is I have to tread carefully here because I don't like to, paint with too broad a brush when it comes to Russian culture. But, the value placed on life is, frankly, I'm sorry to say, but it just is. It's kind of different in Russia than it is in the West. Look, they still have the same military doctrine. It's exactly the same military doctrine that they had when they went into Grozny back in 1997, 98, the first war, where it was tragic for them because the Chechens knocked out the first tank and the last tank, and they just pounded the heck out of everything else. And we're now 30 years later, and then they're still doing the same thing. You see the Ukrainians using this exact same tactic that the Chechens used, and the Russians just keep doing it because Russian military doctrine has always been, and Russian attitude towards war is, we got lots of people. We got lots of them. That's one resource we got loads of. So let's just throw them into the meat grinder.
As we were talking, by the way, during the break, that is no longer true. The Russian demographic collapse is just as real as it is in South Korea, as real as it is in Japan, as real as it is in China and Brazil, everywhere else. They look like mushroom clouds when you look at them over time for a reason. And the fact is that in 10 years, Vladimir Putin is going to have half the fighting force he has. Now, everybody's talking about, well, by that time, we'll have Boston robot dogs. And we'll have robots. Yeah, I doubt it too. But whoever, let's just say he has a junior hiding in the wings. But the point is that by then we'll have, robots will be fighting our wars. Well, that won't work much either. Because you might be able to take some place with robots, but you can't hold it. That's, at this point anyways, and not for a very long time. And so this is a now or never for him too, because he doesn't have enough soldiers right now to do this. He's certainly not going to have enough soldiers in 10 years to do it. So
no, we are living in historic times. This is an
Yes.
inflection point, Hal. This is an inflection point.
Right.
And I have said it on my social media today in repeated posts. A quote by Abraham Lincoln, where basically he says, he talking kind of like what the Trumpists are, the know-nothings back in his era, that we started our country by saying that all men are created equal, and then we made caveats and said, well, all men except for black people, and all men except for Catholics, and all men except for foreigners. In that case, the Lincoln quote goes, I would rather move to a country such as Russia, where they don't even pretend the hypocrisy of believing in liberty and freedom. So,
Right.
I mean, this has been going on for a long time. There's a very distinct cultural difference between us two.
Which, by the way, at that point in history, the variant difference between the two as far as life and experience was relatively small. Most people on Earth were brutally poor till the day they died. And so lifestyle, maybe you don't even experience it. You'd never even bump up against the edges of government in that time period. These days, you sure as heck do. Oh, we got to take a break right now. We'll be back right after. Yeah, give me a second. Yeah, it's right now. We're over by a minute, so we'll be back right after this. It's the House Parks Radio program, Mega Worldwide.
I thought that was coming up.
Yep.
Promo, Hal.
Welcome back to the House Parks Radio program, MegaWorldWide, Chicago's Press Talk, WCPT AM. Woo! Yeah!
Welcome back to the show. I'm Hal Sparks. This is Hal Sparks Mega Worldwide. And of course, Philip Ittner is still with us from Lviv in Ukraine. We've managed to actually have a correspondent on the show. Look at that. It's fun. It's great. And then Johnny Million is looking through the chat at infotainmentwars.com. If you want to contribute to the conversation there, or
there's another question about if there's going to be any impact on the agricultural side of things in Ukraine with planting season coming up.
Good question. Great question. Mm-hmm. And by the way, Hal, I did tweet at you my poet's video. Mm-hmm. The grain production. Look, Ukraine is, I believe, the 5th largest exporter of grain to the world, and generally it goes to Africa and to the subcontinent, India, Pakistan, those kind of places. No, it actually goes everywhere globally, but those are the primary destinations. And because of the war, and because every man who is able to carry a weapon is currently training to fight instead of sowing this year's harvest, when harvest time comes, they are their percentage of export of grain is going to be massively decreased. And we can't say how much at this point, but when the harvest time comes, they're not going to get a lot of grain. And there's a reason why they call Ukraine the bread basket of Europe. I mean, there's a reason why the flag is the wheat of the yellow
wheat field in the sky.
Blue sky. Yeah. It's an amazing country. It's beautiful. And it's so fertile for creating grain. And I fear globally, and this is why when people say, why do we care about Ukraine? It's so far away. Well, this is why, because in an interconnected 21st century world, what happens here is going to have an effect the ripple effect is going to be well beyond these borders. So it's a really good question. Right. And the answer is we should be concerned.
Yes,
I'm with you, Hal. Never panic. Yeah. Keep calm and carry on. But
be aware of what's really going to be affected by this. So, and for people at home, the fact that Ukrainian wheat and foodstuffs go primarily to Africa is, and there are currently 3 or 4 civil wars going on in Africa, inter-country. Very few of them are cross-country. There's some border disputes and that kind of stuff, but not where anybody has ever, in those areas, has ever had a truly entrenched stake in the ground, this is it kind of conversation about which tribe owns that land and whatnot. It's been going on for quite some time. It's true in a lot of places in the world, but it's definitely true there. So it's already hard to get food to those folks. And if there's less of that food, and there's less petroleum on the market, because as much as we in America are shifting away to renewables and all that stuff, as much as Europe is shifting away from renewables, if you want to get food deep into in country to impoverished people in the developing world, you're going to use a diesel truck. With crap range. That's right. And if there's less of that food on there in the first place, there's slower or fewer boats coming in with that food. If fuel is more expensive, they will use that truck trip to take that food someplace else. And you know, that's one of the difficulties about like us dropping fossil fuels like a hot rock, like some people are suggesting, like tomorrow, turn it off, we're done. You can do that in a place like the United States with a lot. It'll be very painful, but 1 billion people will die worldwide within 10 months because all the food and a lot of the water will stop. And that's one of the costs of the Ukraine crisis beyond this, beyond the invasion. It's also one of the reasons because of the gas and oil in the waters around Odessa and Crimea, and the fact that it's the breadbasket of Europe, that there's food to be made there. And most of, and you can traverse it. There's rivers, there's roads, whereas in Russia, there are no traversable rivers in Russia at all. You know, we have the
permafrost, right. 8 months
Terrible.
a year, and no infrastructure.
It's awful. And, you know, we don't realize often how lucky we have it in the United States in that we have the Great Lakes, the Mississippi River, all the offshoots of it, and a connection to the Gulf all the way from Canada. And that is
Herr Sparks, you have given me the perfect segue. You have given me the perfect segue, sir. Here is a fundamental difference and similarity that I think will help your listeners and your viewers understand why it is Russia and the USA tend to always kind of butt heads. And the analogy is this: you remember in Star Trek there was the old dark mirror, universe, right?
Right.
Think of Russia and the USA as dark mirrors of one another. We're both massive.
Yeah. Stranger Things.
We're right.
They're the upside down.
To pop culture. Always goes back to pop culture. We're both massive. Russia, of course, has 11 time zones. We have 3. They're vastly larger, but most of it is useless except for stuff. Yes. Almost more stuff that they can rip out of the ground. But here's the fundamental difference, and I think this is really important for folks to understand. And I've been studying Russia for many, many years. We are a mirror of one another, but a dark mirror. And the fundamental difference is this: we fought our way into nature. We came from abroad, and we conquered nature. We built infrastructure as we went. We had territories that turned into states. We have roadways. We have railways. We in an optimistic fashion thought we will conquer this land and we will turn it into a great hospitable land for human inhabitants. Russia is the exact opposite. They fought their way out of nature to create a civilization. It's the reason why every town in Russia has a Kremlin, has a castle. It's the first thing they build. Build a border, put people inside of it, always know that the wolf is outside the door. Always. Nature is coming to kill you. Nature will kill you. Life is cheap. That's the fundamental difference. We fought our way into nature and felt we could conquer it, and that's an optimistic view of the world. They fought their way out of nature, always knowing that the wolf is just there. And that fundamental difference creates that dark mirror.
They also got, you can also look at it from a strategic point of view, that what is current Russia, the landmass itself. Most of it, including sort of Kazakhstan, the Kazakhstan area and the old the old Soviet Union area, is very much like Western China, largely inhospitable, some function as far as natural resources like lithium and oil and those kind of things, but not where you would get water or foodstuffs. Non-arable land and lots of it, inhospitable and all that kind of stuff. And you could argue that while the Ukrainian part of Russian history, which is Prussian history and all that kind of the Slavs or whatever, created something worthwhile in the Ukrainian area and Lithuania and Finland and those kind of areas, what the Russian mentality is born out of the kind of people who kept getting broomed because they were either too violent or taking someone else's stuff or whatever. So they lost all that coast.
And it's a zero-sum game for them. Winner and loser, nothing in between.
That's right. And that area that Russia made is a self-fulfilling psychological cycle of inhospitability and warlike fortressing. That because, I mean, go watch stories about Russian super packs of wolves in relation to the analogy you were making earlier, but is an actual factual one that literally during the during the war, I think it was during World War I, the Russians and the Germans stopped fighting for a time to fight the wolves because they were eating more people. Yes. They were eating more people than they could kill of each other. And do you know how many people that is? It's insane. So that's where they are. And so you live in that. And you can almost look at it in America. The closest thing I would say is the city, the rural versus urban idea of gun ownership. It's very similar. So if you want to understand Russians to some degree in this area, to a lesser extent, certainly the Southerners in America have it pretty friggin' cush comparatively. But if you're in the woods, if you live out in the sticks, and I grew up in Kentucky, a lot of people know, and you're, 20 miles from town, if you call the police, it's going to be a long time before they respond and a longer time for them to get there. So you better be able to handle stuff yourself. So having a gun on the property is logical, more so than if you live in a city and you're in an apartment building where you have other options, other neighbors, emergency services are in the minutes, not hours. Now, Russia,
and
think of Russia in many ways.
To that, what if in Kentucky, whatever highway system, whatever interstate system was submerged in mud for 6 months of the year, let's say, and basically impassable. Russia has a bulk of cities and civilization on their western edge of their country. They have a couple of dotted areas of settlements like Yekaterinburg and Irkutsk, and then all the way out to Vladivostok. It's why we should count our lucky stars that while we both have access to the Pacific and the Atlantic, we have a massive network of infrastructure to transport goods so that we can be a global trading partner. Russia can't do that. Russia, getting goods from Vladivostok to Moscow is a nightmare, an absolute nightmare. So to say that they are both a Pacific and an Atlantic power is not really accurate. So, we have an advantage with that the Russians don't have.
Right. Exactly. And China has some of that East Coast aspect on their country, that they can go to the sea in a way that the Russians can't. But it still doesn't help them because they have a similar mentality based on the inner kingdom that they had a long time ago. That mentality, it used to be, their country was run that way as well. Chongqing was the capital of China for a few years, in the early parts of World War II, because Japan drove them back. And I've made this analogy before, so people can understand it, that China's capital was driven back from Beijing and Nanjing to Chongqing. And the equivalent would be if the Germans had attacked the east coast of the United States and we had to move Washington, D.C. to Denver for 4 years. Understand what that would do to your mentality in how you feel about the rest of the world. And that was a grandma ago. Right?
Yeah.
So we have to take a break. We're in our last segment. So hold. I feel like the Braveheart of talk right now. We'll be back right after this.
Stay on target.
And what I want is some chat questions, Johnny Million, for our happy ending at the end. So we'll call it lightning round because we'll have a couple of minutes. We'll be back right after this.
All right,
it's the House Park Radio program,
guys.
Mega Worldwide. At Philip Ittner on Twitter and at Johnny Million 1 on Twitter. And of course, I'm at House Sparks on everything. We'll be back.
I am happy, you are happy. Let us be happy together, whether the weather is cloudy or sunny. I will always be your funny honey bunny. I am lucky, you are lucky. Let us get lucky together, whether the weather is cloudy or breezy. I'll be there to say, hey, come on, let's take it easy. Because isn't it nice to have the friends that you do? And isn't it nice that the sky is so blue? And isn't it nice to say I love you, chugga chugga choo choo, woo woo. I am smiling, you are smiling. Let us smile together, whether the weather is cloudy or stormy. I will still be there in the morning. I'll be right by your side in the morning. Making breakfast in the morning. I hope that you like cereal.
Yay! I feel like Philip was bringing that up, that some of us saw that the band in Odessa playing "Don't Worry, Be Happy" in front of the sandbags in front of their cathedral. Which was both beautiful, sweet, and heartbreaking people at the same time. Right.
And heartbreaking. Yeah, amazing people. I'm serious. I'm going to get you a gig at that comic shop here in Lviv when this is over.
I'm for it. I'll do shows for free for the Ukrainian people. They need the laughs. I'll be glad to do it. So, I want to see if we got some. I know we have questions from the chat, and I want to spend the last couple of minutes in the show with those. What do we have, Johnny Million?
Rapid fire.
Well, first, real quick, where are you, Phil? Are you at some workplace? Very high ceilings.
So no, that's my angle of my camera. I'm in a little apartment that I rented from a local. I'm on a central square. I won't say exactly where, but I'm in the center of Lviv. And so will the Russians.
I found it on Scare B&B. All right.
Second question.
So second question, and I kind of alluded to this before. What do the people in Ukraine in general think about Fox News?
In Ukraine or in Russia?
I don't know. I guess either. Like, do they find allies?
In Russia, they love him, especially Tucker Carlson. He speaks to them in a way that he touches them in a way that he shouldn't.
He has a certain, he has a certain masculinity about him that strikes him as a strong leader. Now that he's shunned the bow tie I'm just asking a question. Yeah.
I'm just asking a question. The Ukrainians loathe him. They loathe Fox. They know what the deal is. Next.
What is your tattoo?
I became a British citizen, a subject of Her Majesty the Queen, about 4 months ago. I know you're an anti-royalist, but send her victorious, happy and glorious, long to reign over us. God save the Queen. So I'm a British citizen, and to mark that, I got that. Don't worry. Be happy.
It says keep calm and carry on.
Keep calm and carry on. And then that's the Queen, the monarch that I took my oath of allegiance to. That's Elizabeth Regina II. So Queen Elizabeth II.
There you go. Look at that.
And that's the date. That's the date I took.
Look at that. That's amazing.
Oath of citizenship.
That's how you get in a fight in an Irish bar, son.
Russians
that's
leaving.
what happens here.
Sorry, Johnny, go ahead.
Russians leaving. How are they getting out, and where are they going?
Anywhere they can. Western Europe, preferably. But if they can't go to Western Europe, a lot of them are going to the Baltic states because there's a language commonality there, although the Baltics are increasingly, I got yelled at in Estonia once for talking Russian when I wanted to buy a chicken sandwich. So, they're less and less likely to be speaking Russian, but there's a kinship there. So a lot of them are going to the Baltic states.
What's the, real quick, this is me. Hold on, real quick. What's the level of English where in
the Baltic states? Oh, in Ukraine? In Ukraine, not great. It's English is not.
My guess it's going to increase.
You think? So I get by on my Russian. And I have been going to Ukrainians and saying, do you speak any English? And they say no. And then I say, in my Russian, I'm terribly sorry to speak to you in the language of the occupier, but it's the only language we have in common, and I don't speak Ukrainian. So, and look, these people are smart.
I do this. I do the same thing.
It goes to the no-fly zone thing. It goes to the no-fly zone thing.
I do the same thing with my Spanish in Mexico.
People. Yeah.
Right.
They're not stupid people. They understand the global ramifications and the possibility of an escalation of the war beyond their borders if there's a no-fly zone. They're not stupid. They're just desperate. They're fighting for their life.
Yep.
They're fighting for their life.
Will Russians get rid of Putin over this war?
There's a distinct possibility. Yeah. Russia's history has been such that nothing happens. It all happens at once. It is a cascade effect. Everybody suffers and suffers and suffers. Thank you to the Orthodox Church, not the Soviets. Don't blame communism. It's the Russian Orthodox Church that I blame for much of the woes in Russia. And the mentality is suffer until it's too much and you can't bear it, and then everything blows up. And the sharks are already starting to circle. And they're taking nips out of one another, which is what they do until the alpha is determined, and then that alpha will usurp the previous one. It's how the history... And look, Russian leaders have been dethroned over wars throughout their history. Nicholas I was dethroned because of a disastrous policy in World War I. Brezhnev was kicked out, which led to perestroika and glasnost because of his disastrous approach in Afghanistan. This could be Putin's Afghanistan, absolutely.
It definitely is. I actually do think there's a direct line to that happening sooner rather than later, actually. But go ahead, Johnny.
I agree. This is a question that wasn't posed as a question. It says, update on space station Russia transport.
Yeah.
Well, they've stopped. The head of the Russian, basically Russia's NASA, has said that we're not going to fly you up there anymore. You can't go to our space our launch pad at Baikonur in Kazakhstan anymore, and we're not going to fly you to the International Station, which of course now our multi-billionaire space adventurers. Musk and the like
are ready to jump right in.
We'll do it. Yeah.
Yeah. So, also, by the way, there's another reason. Philip, as well, for the reason why they don't want us part of the space program, because it's in Kazakhstan. And after what happened in Kazakhstan and Kazakhstan's new alignment with the Chinese and the fear that they might be more palatable to the West ultimately over time because they are oil and gas rich, there's a lot of bribery and all kinds of fun stuff they could look forward to if they just detach themselves from Putin for a while. That's why the troops sent in to protect Chinese interests in those areas. That if we go in there with our space program continues unabated in there, there's a lot of scientists and military people and folks that have to be around when that happens. And the more of those people, it's harder to keep track of them. The more chance that somebody is in there doing something that the Russians are, again, paranoid, see the CIA everywhere.
And not only that, but another layer on the Russian onion dome church that is this situation. In addition to that, the Russians being the Russians have poisoned everything around Baikonur with jet fuel, and it's just toxic because that's how they operate.
Yeah, it's like Chinese farmland right now. I don't know if that's another story we'll go into another time. When you and I have lunch when you're back, we'll deal with the tears I weep for Chinese farmland. But anyways, okay. So Johnny, what do we got?
Done.
All right. Well, the one thing, in general thing, is everybody loves Phil and they want you back. So please come back, Phil.
I love them back.
Yes,
your fans are amazing. They have been
and
I thank them so much. I started vlogging because of it. I did one vlog, and they responded so positively to it that I'm going to keep doing it. I used to have a bunch of other strings here that I was doing, and we'll get into that, and we can talk about American corporate media at another date and my gripe with them. But the future is online, and the future is with your audience, and I'm so grateful for it, and thank you for letting me appropriate
I agree.
them.
Oh, no.
And one other person, if we could squeeze this in, somebody wanted you to finish the story about the children in maternity hospitals.
Yes. Okay, quickly. So the attack on the maternity hospital in Mariupol, I don't think is even remotely possible that was a false flag. Maria Zakharova, the press secretary for the foreign ministry, came out and said it was the Azov brigade, which are, admittedly not very nice guys. They are really bad. Far extremist rights, almost to the point of Nazism, yes.
Seeded by the Russians, by the way.
Indeed, but also they're fighting for their very existence. So the Azov Brigade, they would make a deal with the devil if it was able to fight off the Russian invader. So they're going to have to deal with that post-war. It's a major issue. They'll have to deal with it. But the idea that even the Azov Brigade, which are nationalist Ukrainians who have a sense of we love our Ukrainian mothers and all this kind of stuff, you really think that they would attack a maternity ward and kill Ukrainian mothers and babies? it reveals more about the cynicism. It reveals more about the cynicism and the lack of understanding of Ukrainians that the Russians have. Show us the proof, Maria Zakharova. Show us the proof, Dmitry Peskov. You can't. And whereas they can't, they can fabricate all sorts of junk. We see with our own two eyes them attacking civilians. Don't let the Russians gaslight you.
The Azov Brigade, thank you. Good. And in perfect timing. And this will send us off. Philip, I want to thank you for being with us today and sticking with us through the whole show and
I'll be here as long as you need me.
Fascinating. Yeah. And then we're at the end of the show today. Follow at Philip Ittner on Twitter and he'll give you regular updates, of course. And I also shared his YouTube channel earlier. He'll also put that out again, as will I. And follow at JohnnyMillion1
I just put up
Twitter
a beautiful video from 5 years ago. It breaks my heart. Go take a look at it. It's a woman performing in better times, and her voice is beautiful, and you'll understand why this country needs defending.
That's right. Thank you so much, Chicago. We'll see you next time. Take care of yourself and take care of somebody else. It's the House Sparks Radio program, Mega Worldwide.